Hello everybody, welcome to Fallen Franchises. I'm your Posh prick, and today we will be talking about... Supernatural is a dark urban fantasy show which began in 2005, Jesus, and features Jared Padalecki and Jensen Ackles as brothers Sam and Dean Winchester traversing the length and breadth of America, hunting down evil demonic junk before said junk kills and terrorizes innocent God-fearing people, or, just ends the world. At least, that's the streamlined version of what the show's actually about. It gets a bit trickier considering the plot and format changed 5 or 6 times over the course of 15 years. For simplicity's sake, think Buffy meets the Great American Road Trip with a lot more Old Testament Bible thumping. But if we're going to talk about one of the longest lasting TV shows in living memory, we gotta talk about how it came to be in the first place. Supernatural's development wasn't quite as smooth a line as one might expect for a show as prolific as this. Creator Eric Kripke developed the damn thing for 10 years before it ever got off the ground, first envisioning it as a movie, then shifting over to a TV format and pitching it to various production companies before the Warner Brothers TV network finally picked it up, due in part to Kripke's involvement on their Tarzan series, which, no, I had never even heard of before making this video. So yeah, if you account for pre-Greenlight development, this show has technically existed in one form or another for 25 years. Kind of like me. Now, Supernatural came out at a time when dark, urban fantasy procedural shows were all the rage. True Blood, Sleepy Hollow, Vampire Diaries, Being Human, the US version. They all attempted to capitalize on that same genre started by shows like Buffy, but none were able to do it quite as successfully as Supernatural. Like a lot of TV pilots, the show went through plenty of workshopping before it landed on its final form. Sam and Dean were meant to be tabloid reporters, not brothers. The whole hunter element wasn't there. Sam was originally called Sal. He and Dean were meant to be raised by their aunt and uncle. Sam's girlfriend in the pilot was going to turn out to be a demon at one point. Sam, or Sal, was going to think that Dean was a serial killer and would have to be convinced that the supernatural existed and all that. But after a fair amount of development hell, the show eventually landed on a pseudo-anthological Freak of the Week format, with Sam and Dean going to a different town and facing a different threat, with the underlying plot of hunting the demon who killed the two chicks in the fridge in the pilot permeating seasons 1 and 2. The show began on September 13th, 2005 and concluded November 19th, 2020 with 327 episodes airing in total. That is getting close to Simpsons levels of prolific for you. And here is where I can get into the first praise for Supernatural during its initial run. The plot of every season does a great job of building on the plot of the previous one. You'd be surprised just how many shows out there fail at this. How often do you watch a season finale and think to yourself, oh boy, I can't wait to see how this is going to pay off next year, only for the first few episodes to come out and immediately resolve the big tense cliffhanger, or worse, pretend like the events of the previous season just had no effect and therefore meant nothing. Not in Supernatural though. Season 1 and 2's premise of, oh no, this evil yellow-eyed demon is causing trouble, directly leads into Season 3's premise of, there's a ton more demons flying around America, which in turn leads into Season 4's premise of the first demon, Lilith, is trying to unleash Lucifer, and so on and so on and so on. I'm not saying that everything was planned out, but for those first few seasons, there seemed to be a fairly straight line bridging the various plot lines and crises together, combined with the incidental Freak of the Week stuff, and that structure made for a pretty damn entertaining show. I remember being on tenterhooks waiting for Season 5 after the 66 Seals arc, just dying to know what happened to our heroes. And that is another positive. The characters and their development on Supernatural was incredibly strong. I would argue that the strongest characters only started showing up in the later seasons. Cass and Crowley immediately come to mind, but Sam and Dean's journey is still worth touching on. Dean is the dutiful son, filling in the shoes of his hunter father, John Winchester, played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, before he was really big news. Sam's the more rebellious child who just wants a normal life, away from all of that evil hunting nonsense, but as he gets pulled back in, he starts falling further and further down the rabbit hole of the ends justify the means. We learn a few unsavory things about his blood line, and drama and carnage ensues. Ultimately, the love and bond between the brothers, that's kind of the glue holding the show together. But as time goes on, more and more characters get introduced into the mix, chief among which being Castiel, otherwise known as the best main character in the entire show period. And this is especially impressive considering that he was never intended to be a main character to begin with. His development from obedient, God-fearing angel to loyal brother to the Winchesters to kinda sorta romantic interest to Dean, don't deny it, is hands down one of the best elements of the later seasons. He's kind of like Supernatural's answer to every Vulcan character in Star Trek, and it's always more fun when a person who doesn't outwardly show emotion ends up being the most layered and fascinating character to dissect. Every character they introduce adds a different layer to the brothers' relationship, which keeps the show fresh. Bobby Singer serves as the uncle/better father figure to the boys, while Ellen Harvell acts as a good mother figure to balance that out. Later on, we get Charlie, who adds an adorable little sister element to the boys, and so on and so on and so on. The show's also not bad in the villain department. As Zazel, the baddie who started off this whole shebang, he was so entertaining. He kind of reminds me a little bit of the Joker. He's just so hateable, but having so much fun doing it, you can't help but feel at least a little endeared to him. I swear the writers liked him so much that they transplanted a little bit of that aloof personality onto Crowley, who's the other incredible villain in Supernatural's lineup. Like a lot of the characters, Crowley changes and evolves over time, and he doesn't necessarily stay evil, but gosh darn it is he such a blast to watch when he is. He's witty, he's confident, he's funny, he's charming, he's condescending as all hell, and he can also be surprisingly intimidating when he needs to be. And then you've got Lucifer, who, while not as memorable as Crowley or as Zazel, still makes for a good big bad in season 5. And they actually do a good twist on the classical character by making him something of a brat, and that's not how we're used to seeing the literal devil portrayed in our media. Out of all of them, Crowley is definitely my favourite of the bunch, which, again, like Castiel, is kinda hilarious when you consider that he was never meant to stay on as long as he did. Jim Beaver, Misha Collins, and Mark Shepard all assumed their parts were going to be quite small, and they expected to get written out by one means or another. Instead, all three were eventually promoted to series regulars. And this is another key element that I can talk about, the fandom. Yes, I know, fandoms are something of a hot button topic. I myself am not the biggest supporter of a lot of fandoms out there, but when it comes to Supernatural, it's kind of impossible to talk about the show without at least touching on the insane fan base that this thing got. People forget now, but this show blew up on social media around the 2010s. It was one of the original fandoms to get a foothold back when Tumblr was first making the rounds, forming one of the most bizarre but popular crossovers ever with Sherlock and Doctor Who of all things to make Super Wholock. Yeah, I've got no idea how the hell that happened either, but it did, and it was massive. Supernatural was an early modern example of fans influencing media, with the writers directly referencing elements of the fandom, such as in the monster at the end of this book episode, keeping fan favourites on board even if that wasn't the original plan, or just wholesale inserting fan ships into the show, or at least queerbaiting the fuck out of said ships. Cowards. But more than anything else, the thing that Supernatural excelled at so well in its initial run was its ability to have fun with almost anything. It really is as close to a perfect format as you can imagine. Sam, Dean, and later Cass are perfect foils for each other, thereby providing plenty of entertaining and dramatic dialogue and interactions episode to episode. The investigative freak of the week element offers a new and creative monster to fight every episode, plus the emphasis on folktales and biblical lore means that there's a wide and imaginative array to choose from, so the format never feels stale. But aside from all that, you really just feel the love that everyone had for the show, be it Kripke and his team of writers, to Jensen, Jared, Misha, and the rest of the cast. Everyone involved felt like one big massive family, and that shone through in every episode, even the forgettable ones. This is kind of a tricky question. Supernatural's decline was at the same time very gradual and very sudden. The first red flag came way back in 2009 with the 5th season finale, which saw the conclusion of the Lucifer arc. This was arguably the big storyline the show had been building to. Everything to do with Zazel, Lilith, Sam's relationship with his more demonic side, Dean's buried desire for a normal life, the brothers' codependency on each other. It was all building to this climactic moment. And then the show kept going. Kripke had intended to end Supernatural at season 5 on a high note, but you know production companies. They won't let a popular show or franchise die until they damn well say so. At this point, Kripke stepped down as the showrunner and the studio decided to pull a Star Wars sequel trilogy and forge on ahead without any directions, changing the person steering the ship every couple of seasons or so. Sarah Gamble took over as the showrunner for seasons 6 to 7, Jeremy Carver for seasons 8 to 11, and finally Andrew Dabb for seasons 12 to 15. This information makes it clearer why the show felt so disjointed after season 5, whereas before, when every plotline felt like a natural progression with each story arc building on the previous one, after the big battle with Lucifer, there didn't seem to be any end goal in sight. Not only that, but the show was cycling through different showrunners every few seasons, with each one having their own vision as to where to take it. Sarah Gamble started getting into the groove for a couple of seasons with the whole Purgatory storyline, only to drop it and let Jeremy Carver come in and effectively forget entirely about Purgatory within a few episodes. He does his own thing for a spell, with the Tablets of God, the Men of Letters, the Mark of Cain, the Darkness, which is literally a Once Upon a Time villain, only to leave and let Andrew Dabb come in and finish things up with the whole John and Mary Winchester resurrection thing, Lucifer stirring up trouble again, the Nephilim, the alternate realities, God wanting to end the planet, and yeah, it gets convoluted. Simply put, after season 5, the show was in a constant state of stop-start. The creative vision of one showrunner was just starting to build up momentum, only for another showrunner to come in and steer things towards their own vision, effectively nullifying the work of whoever came before. No major plot lines or story arcs stayed around long enough to make much of an impact, or get satisfactorily resolved. That whole Leviathan arc, pretty much forgotten after Dick dies. Dean being King of Hell, resolved in a couple of episodes. This led to another problem which comes when any show outstays its welcome and careens ahead without a halfway stable plan in mind: contradictions. So much of what happens in the later seasons end up conflicting with information that we got in the previous ones. Angels have to be really picky about who they choose to be their right vessel, until they don't. Two major archangels like Michael and Lucifer going head to head would lead to a potentially world-ending conflict that might wipe out half of humanity. That's why Sam and Dean were trying so hard to stop that from happening in season 5. Except here, where that exact situation occurs and it just plays out like any other scuffle. Or here, where Lucifer gets killed pretty quickly and unceremoniously by Michael without any fallout. So yeah, by season 12 or so, pretty much all of the rules that they had spent years building up pretty much got chucked out of the window, which is more likely to happen with a show that is constantly trying to up the ante without a clear goal in mind other than keeping the story going. Where this becomes really obvious is in the show's relationship with death. Literally. Christ, you thought the MCU was bad for resurrecting characters. They ain't got nothing on Supernatural. Sam dies, then comes back. Then Dean dies and comes back. Then Cass dies and comes back. Then Sam dies again and comes back again. Then Crowley dies and comes back. Then Cass dies again and comes back again. Then Bobby dies and comes back, kind of. Then Dean and Cass kinda dies and comes back again. My god, death really does not mean much of anything in this show, and he is an actual physical character. Hell, even death dies here. That's just parodic levels of fourth wall breaking. As a result, there's not that many emotional stakes when anyone dies because we know that there's a good chance they're gonna come back in a few seasons. They resurrected Meg, they resurrected Gabriel, they even resurrected John and Mary Winchester, even though the entire driving force for these brothers in the beginning was their parents' demises. Also, they made Mary kind of an asshole, and that's just not okay. To put it simply, the reason that Supernatural fell so far from grace by its ending is that season 5 was the ending. That's what Kripke, the guy who spent 10 years trying to get this puppy made, intended. But production companies being production companies, a hit show like this couldn't be allowed a dignified ending because think of the views! We knew early on that there was a trajectory in place, even if all of the pieces hadn't been laid out yet. Everything was building to the Lucifer Lucifer arc because we had just one guy overseeing things. After season 5, there didn't seem to be any structure anymore. It felt like the different showrunners were throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick, and in fairness, some of those things did legitimately stick. My personal favourite stuff post season 5 was all done by Sarah Gamble. The Soulless Sam plot, Purgatory, Eve, the Leviathans, everything to do with Crowley, that stuff was all great. Even the more personal character elements felt warranted and emotionally satisfying, particularly in regards to Dean. In terms of character arcs, most of seasons 1 to 5 mainly went to Sam. He's the outsider in the beginning, the point of view character. He's the one who goes through a cycle of revenge, consuming his goodness, turning demonic, causing the apocalypse, only to redeem himself through extreme self-sacrifice to stop it from happening. All of the development went to Sam in the beginning. After season 5 though, we started to get a little more love shown to Dean and Cass, and that was sorely needed in my opinion. Seeing Dean accept that the normal life just isn't for him in season 6, to the whole Mark of Cain thing causing him to question his quote heroic nature, to his developing relationship with Cass, which admittedly doesn't end the most satisfactorily, was a really solid through line for the later seasons. However, as much as characters like Dean and Cass get good developments later on, others ended up falling by the wayside. The most obvious example would ironically be Sam, who stands out as another casualty of the show overstaying its welcome. Much like Supernatural's plot was originally intended to only last 5 seasons, Sam's character journey, while impactful, was meant to conclude with him sacrificing himself to undo the apocalypse he started. His character trajectory is done after that, so by continuing the show past its intended cutoff point, the studio had effectively tied the showrunner's hands in regards to one of its leads. There's nowhere for Sam to go because his main journey is over. Sure, he gets dropped into a few token plot points like his soullessness or seeing visions of Lucifer and all that, but in regards to his actual development, there isn't really much to work with. He ends up becoming something of a third wheel to Dean and Cass, and arguably Crowley, for 10 more seasons until the show finally dies. And we can't talk about Supernatural's fall from grace without touching on its final episode. Very long story short, Dean dies killing a nest of vampires. He asks Sam to let him go, which he does. Dean meets Bobby in heaven, who tells him that Castiel and the Nephilim Jack have reshaped the place to be less segregated, and that all of his loved ones are out and about waiting to meet up with him. Sam, meanwhile, lives out a normal life on Earth the way he always wanted. He gets a kid that he names Dean, dies of old age, and then meets his actual brother Dean again in heaven. All things considered, not the worst ending you could have given these guys. It's sappy and happy, which is warranted given everything that these characters have been through, and apparently the original ending was going to include every major character who had ever worked with the Winchesters over the years. That would have been a really killer idea, but then COVID came around and blew that idea up, so god damn it. But there was some annoyance at the way that they handled Dean and Cass's romance in the final few episodes, and yes, it is 100% a romance. There's a reason that Cass's last line on the show to Dean is "I love you." Misha Collin has said on interviews that he had been playing Castiel as gay for Dean for years. It's completely a romance, just an unsatisfying one, because this is yet another example of the dreaded kill your gays trope. And yes, I know technically Cass got resurrected by Jack to help reshape heaven and all that, but we never even see him in the finale, so it still counts. And the only reason that they didn't include Cass in the finale was because they didn't want Dean to come to terms with his own possible romantic feelings for a man. This is especially frustrating as a part of Dean's development over the course of the show was overcoming the rigid uber-masculine structure that his dad forced on him. From a young age, Dean was encouraged to act as an effective carbon copy of his father. He was never allowed to have independent wants and desires, such to the point that he couldn't even allow himself to want or desire anything or anyone that didn't conform to the identity his father imposed on him.
What are the things that you want? What are the things that you dream? I mean, your car? That's Dad's. Your favorite leather jacket? Dad's. Your music? Dad's. Do you even have an original thought?
Dean and Cass's relationship was the crux for Dean's entire character arc, his catalyst for being the man that he truly is and not the man his father wanted him to be. But when it came to actually going full force with it by confirming Dean's romantic and or sexual feelings for another man, the showrunners couldn't, or rather wouldn't, commit. This to me highlights the unwillingness of the show to subvert traditional heteronormative media like Supernatural. Hollywood loves movies and shows with men as the main characters, so long as those men are explicitly straight. They're fine making the softer angel character gay for the sake of appeasing the fan base, but heaven forfend the tough masculine bro-tastic protagonist have even a smidge of queer leanings. We can have Cass say I love you to Dean, but we can't have Dean say it back to him, because then it would confirm that Dean is queer and we're just not willing to go down that route, not even after 15 years with this guy. So yeah, the showrunners are cowards for not concluding Dean's character arc with him overcoming his toxic father's influence and embracing his sexuality by just kissing the dreamy angel who sacrificed himself for his ass again and again and again. But aside from that, the ending itself wasn't the worst one in TV history. It's definitely not Game of Thrones levels of insulting. So why is Supernatural still considered a failure? At its core, Supernatural highlights the pros and cons of change. Fundamentally speaking, the show in the final season is not the same as it was in its first season. You can't really keep anything going this long and expect it to stay the same, and nor should you. For perspective's sake, Supernatural started the same year Nickelback's Photograph was topping the charts, and survived long enough to see COVID. Of course it's going to shift directions in that time. Over many seasons, Supernatural slipped away from its horror-themed roots and became more action-adventure oriented, taking itself less and less seriously as time went on. Again, can't say I blame the showrunners for doing that. There's only so many times that you can end the world or kill and resurrect your leads before the entire concept of death or global annihilation just fails to terrify us. If they didn't change the show's tone and genre, it would wind up feeling stale and boring. If Supernatural was going to keep to its traditional urban legend horror vibe, then it realistically should have ended at season 5. And while I'm not necessarily opposed to that idea, if it ended there, we would have missed out on a lot of the imaginative concepts and character development that we got throughout the later seasons, even with the dodgier writing thrown in. That shift into more comedic territory might have felt jarring to some viewers, but for me, it led to some of the best moments in the whole show. I mean, Balthazar going back in time and unsinking the Titanic just because he hated the movie and the Celine Dion song, that shit's priceless. The reason the Leviathans were such great antagonists was that they veered away from the traditional meh, gonna kill humanity from the shadows vibe, and instead went in a more evil corporate America direction, which managed to be funny, scary, imaginative, and quite timely all at once. One of my favourite interactions in the whole show was just Crowley and Dick, the King Leviathan, haggling over the specifics of a demon contract, red pen and all. That's just a hilarious idea, and we never would have gotten it if the show ended at season 5. So in a way, I'm kind of torn on Supernatural. If I had to give a definitive answer as to why it fell from grace, I would say that it simply stayed around for too long. There were plenty of points where the showrunners could have given these characters a graceful conclusion even after season 5 wrapped up, but instead they just kept going and going and going and plumbing the barrel for ideas until the damn thing ran dry. And that most likely happened because the production company wasn't about to say bye-bye to one of their biggest cash cows. That's not to say I think the show was complete rubbish by the end. While it's clear that they were running on fumes by around season 10 or 11, some of those fumes did give us legitimately great moments, but at the same time, it gave us some real jumping the shark stupid moments, like bringing the brothers' mum and dad back, which is a really dumb idea. You could tell the writers, the creative heads, the actors, everyone involved loved the show to pieces even towards the end, and were trying their damnedest to stick the landing, but no show can keep the fire that they started with burning forever. Ultimately, the studio tied the showrunners' hands, forced them to keep going past the point that the show was intended to end, and while they tried the best that they could and even succeeded in parts, those creative fires just ended up burning less and less bright, until by the end of its 15-year run, Supernatural flickered out quite unspectacularly. To quote another show featuring sassy demons and adorable angels, Supernatural didn't so much as fall as saunter vaguely downwards. So that was my Fallen franchise video on Supernatural. I hope you guys liked it. I'm definitely going to be doing a lot more of these since you guys are responding positively to them. If you've got any more suggestions for Fallen franchises that I should cover in the future, leave it in the comments down below, hit the like button, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.